Joining us now is David Keene. He's the president of the National Rifle Association. Mr. Keene, thanks for joining us. The president said you're a liar. Do you have a response?
Well, that's the way to engage in rational public policy discussion, I have to say. You know, he called us a liar in part for complaining that he used the victims of these tragedies as props, and he did it while he was standing with all of these victims behind him, using them as props.
Yeah.
So the fact is, I can understand his being upset at a major loss for an initiative that he put so much behind, but that doesn't really justify having a public rant where he's attacking the NRA, he's attacking our members, he's attacking citizens and senators of the United States, threatening them and all the rest.
Yeah.
I think that that's really not a seemly way for a president of the United States to respond to a legislative defeat.
But David Keene, the specific lie I think that he really tried to emphasize, or what he's calling a lie, is the contention that the Toomey Manchin amendment on background checks would or could lead to record keeping and potentially a national gun registry. Can you address that head on, please? What was your objection?
Sure, I can. The fact is that has been the goal of Chuck Schumer and of the Justice Department for some time. This was a step in that direction. It is true that the legislation had some language in it that said we're not going to do that, but it also was vague as to what would be done with some of the records. We've been concerned constantly about this desire to establish a gun registry for a variety of reasons. And we think that as the senators looked at that, they look at it, they have staff, they analyze these things. They don't just take what we say as gospel any more than they take what the president and his lobbyists say as gospel. They looked at it, they decided that the arguments that were made by the NRA and other groups and individuals and their constituents had more merit than the arguments that were being made by the other side, and that's the way they voted.
I'd like to point out that there are some reports coming out this morning of the Hill that he may actually, Harry Reid may actually pull down the bill and not go any further with it. But one of the things,
because the underlying bill is so much worse even than the so-called compromise that they were working on. You know, our objection to the amendment was that it was being sort of presented as a peace treaty to end this war between the ideological factions on this. In fact, it was like a 2-week armistice, and they were asking us to go along with something, and then they'd be right back, because the exclusions that they included in this bill would have been the loopholes of tomorrow that they'd try to close, and we just felt that this was putting us on the wrong track.
Let me ask you a devil's advocate kind of question here, because the president says 90% of Americans want a background check provision in the law. But my sense of it is, if 90% of Americans really wanted that, it would have happened.
Well, that's right. You know, the Gallup poll this last week put the importance of these gun control measures at about 4% among the public. The reason that the president and his supporters hit upon the background check proposal as the thing that they would really go after rather than the so-called assault weapons ban and these other things was because superficially it sounds so good. Like a lot of things, the devil's in the details, and it was the details that destroyed this proposal. And it's the details that once people looked at it, they didn't like. Now, if you ask folks who don't know anything about the details or the substance, isn't it a good idea to check? They say, sure it is. We support the NICS system, the instant check system that is in place now for dealers, and we will continue to propose that it be improved. But, you know, I'm always suspicious when somebody comes up with a universal proposal about anything that's going to solve all of our problems, because it usually doesn't.
David Keene from the NRA is our guest, and you know there's some news here in Maryland actually about your lawsuit against the so-called assault weapons ban that just got signed into law, and also about how gun rights advocates in Maryland are going to be joining that suit and supporting it to the detriment of actually trying to push through a statewide referendum on that law. I want to ask you about that, but if you can hold with us, we have to get to it right after we take a quick break for traffic and weather. Many people say the Second Amendment won yesterday. Many people cynically say the big gun lobby won yesterday. The president of the big gun lobby is our guest, David Keene. And I wanted to ask you about Maryland. Now, as a conservative, I get a little worried about wanting to fight legislative battles in the courts because that hasn't always worked very well in the past. Please tell me about the status of your fight against the Maryland so-called assault weapons ban and other provisions therein, and about the news last night about how there won't be a statewide referendum. Instead, groups who are against this law are going to join your lawsuit.
Well, we think under the circumstances that's the right way to go. A referendum of the sort that was proposed would cost millions of dollars. We're out there fighting in various places, New York, Colorado, and elsewhere, that have been passed that we think are unconstitutional. And we think in this instance, because of what the Supreme Court has said, that the courts are the right way to go. You know, these so-called assault weapons ban, the bans on semi-automatic rifles that people don't like the looks of, was almost specifically addressed by the Supreme Court in the Heller decision, which ratifies the individual right to keep and bear arms. In that decision, the court wrote that while it is legitimate to impose reasonable restrictions on Second Amendment rights, just as you can on the right to free speech in the First Amendment, those restrictions have to be very narrow and are critically looked at. And they said that one thing that you cannot do is you cannot ban a firearm that's commonly owned and widely used for legitimate purposes.
Right.
The AR-15, the lead semi-automatic weapon that Dianne Feinstein and others and the governor of Maryland don't like, is owned by about 4.5 million Americans. It's the long arm most used for training. It's most used for competition. It's used for hunting. It's used for home and personal defense. It's almost as if the court was saying, you know, they're going to try this again. Why don't we just give them some advance warning that this is the wrong road to travel? So unless that court is changed, based on the language of that decision, we think a lot of these feel-good laws are going to fall.
Well, it sounds like, having studied the situation very, very carefully, that you feel like it's pretty much a slam dunk in the court of law that this will not prevail.
It's never a slam dunk. It's never a slam dunk in a legislature or a court of law or in the court of public opinion. But we do believe that these provisions are so blatantly offensive to the Second Amendment as interpreted by the Supreme Court that they will of necessity fall.
But David Keene, sticking with Maryland for a moment, isn't it true that the best way to protect gun owners' rights in Maryland is to change the makeup of the state house in Maryland and of the state senators and the delegates? What will the NRA do to address the elections coming up? Are you going to be bolstering some of the campaigns of some of the gun rights candidates?
As you know, we always step up to the plate for those of us who support the Second Amendment, and we tend to support candidates against those who don't. That's what we do historically. We'll have to look at the elections in Maryland, but ultimately, of course, the way that you solve these things is you change the legislative makeup of the states that are doing it. And the problem that gun owners have faced in this round of battles over the Second Amendment is not exclusively, but largely comes from what let's face it, are one-party states, New York and Maryland, where governors who are trying to exploit the issue, I think because both the governor of Maryland and the governor of New York like to think of themselves as a potential president.
Yeah, that's not going to work out so well for them long term if they really do want to be president.
What they don't realize is that they're doing what a lot of people accuse some of the Republican candidates of doing in the last cycle, which is playing to an extreme part of their base, which might get them some short-term benefit, but would make them unelectable in any overall election. So what's happening in Maryland, if that's in fact the motivation, is that Governor O'Malley is making his citizens suffer for his own ambitions, but without realizing it, he's committing political suicide.
David Keene, thank you for joining us this morning. You are going to be a man in demand, and we're thrilled that you were joining us here first on WMAL.